Hello, I'm Alan Stoga, chairman of the Tallberg Foundation, and I am delighted to welcome you to this year's virtual celebration of global leadership and global leaders. This, in effect, is the last stop on a train that started in March. Since then, we've gone through the entire process of looking for great leaders. We had 2,400 nominations from 132 countries, and through a combination of artificial intelligence and very hard work from human intelligence, we have reduced that massive pile to 6 people, 3 established leaders that we will honor today and 3 emerging leaders that we will honor on Thursday. Today, we're going to focus on people who have already demonstrated outstanding leadership that is innovative, courageous, rooted in universal values, and global in perspective. You will have an opportunity to meet them, at least virtually, and they are much better in person than on the screen. And I hope that you will take advantage of the opportunity to ask them questions about what they do and, more importantly, why they do it. Now I am proud to introduce the winners of the 2022 Tällberg-SNF-Eliasson Global Leadership Prize.
My very first job was working as a first vet for the Uganda Wildlife Authority. They felt they needed a vet because gorilla tourism had begun and they were concerned that people were going to make gorillas sick. However, one of the first diseases I had to deal with was not a disease from tourists, but from the local community, when gorillas went outside the park to eat people's crops. We found that they came across dirty clothing on scarecrows and picked up scabies or sarcoptic mange, which resulted in them losing hair, developing white scaly skin, and the baby gorilla dying. And this made me realize that you can't protect the gorillas without improving the health of the people who they share a habitat with.
You know, you cannot have a real journalism in the conditions of dictatorial regime. The reason I left Russia, I was unable to write about the contemporary politics in Russia. It was that I was facing a jail time. And obviously, when you sit in jail, you cannot cover anything, you cannot write anything. It's impossible to be an independent journalist and to work inside Russia. You can write opinions, probably, but there is no way to do any news-based journalism inside Russia.
In the core, Hill is about making justice systems deliver, and not just deliver for people who have money, people who can read, people who can write, but to make it deliver for everybody. Getting innovation going in the justice sector is a complex thing. We started out the usual way, by stimulating innovators with an innovation award, and we built even a justice accelerator that is now operational. But we learned that those innovations are not really going to scale like something comparable would probably in, for example, the world of climate, if you don't change the enabling environment.
We promote coexistence between humans and wildlife here by improving the health and livelihoods of the local communities and preventing zoonotic disease between the people and the wildlife. And then we help coffee farmers living around the park and give them a good price for good coffee. One thing I've found is it's very important to be more collaborative. It's a concerted effort. You can't do it alone as conservationists. You have to reach out to the development community. Reducing poverty in the local communities reduces their need to poach and collect firewood. You need to reach out to the health community, particularly in the case of great apes, so that they don't make the great apes sick. But also, we find that when we improve community health, we're improving their attitudes to conservation. They're much more willing to coexist because we don't only care about the trees and the wild animals, we also care about them.
It is to say that any changes to Russian journalism come with the change of the regime. We have to take this regime down. I hope that this awful war in Ukraine, this war of aggression, which is conducted by my country and the army for which I pay taxes, will become a final blow to Putin's regime. Only after it happens, Russian journalism will be able to resume their work inside Russia. You know, step number one, to take Putin down. Step number two, to release Alexei Navalny, Ilya Yashin, and others, leaders of the Russian opposition from jails, where they are now. And step number three, start to rebuild the country. We will have basically to start from scratch.
One of the main challenges in our work is the question of ownership. Who owns the improvement of the justice system? So creating ownership is one of our key challenges. And when I use creating, that's also difficult because ownership, I've learned, has to be assumed. Nobody outside can create ownership. And when the ownership is taken up, it is his or her ownership for which you can't take credit. I gave you ownership. No, the other person took it, which says a lot about the way we work, the way I need to lead this organization, and the way the people at Hill need to work.
Thank you for having me. It's a great day to celebrate these leaders, and thank you for all you do. Talking about leadership, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. Well, let's talk about leadership, which I've always assumed is something that's easier to recognize than talk about. But in your role as co-president of SNF, you essentially spend your days with leaders from all around the world, from all sorts of different sectors, everything from sports to politics, to business, to nonprofits. Some of those are successful leaders. Some of them are failures. Most of them are probably mediocre. But as you think about the leaders you know and leadership you've seen, what makes a great leader?
It should be a simple answer, but it's a very complicated one. And I think I always go back to Martin Luther King when he said the famous, it's not about the color of your skin, it's about the content of your character. And I, with all due respect to Martin Luther King, I take that, I use it, and I expand it. It's not about your social status, it's not about your financial status, it's not about your political affiliations, it's all about the content of your character. And I think we have to go back to basics to focus on character. And I think great leaders throughout history have been people with great character. That doesn't mean that they are perfect, but it means that it starts from a strong character and hopefully with a good character and integrity. And then what follows, there are a lot of other things about being able to inspire people, and you have to lead by example. So you have to work hard, and you have to try to inspire and engage and embrace your team in believing in the same ideals and ideas that you have, so you can all move forward together. And I think there are many things that are happening nowadays, but I think also leadership is needed as much as ever, but maybe a different kind of leadership also, that individual leaders on their own, taking things on their own as used to be a lot more in the past, I think is not as needed today as it is for somebody to lead and be able to make people follow and create these teams that together can work together, because they are very complicated problems that we have to deal with today.
I think it's an incredibly important point. In the jury process over the last 8 years, we've come to make a distinction between heroes, which we still need heroes, and leaders. Heroes, Joan of Arc, people who do an extraordinary thing, very briefly change something, and then disappear. And what you're describing is leadership that is there for the long march, first. And second, leaders as measured by followers. A leader without followers is not a leader.
Exactly.
By definition.
A hero, one can become a hero, but you don't try to become a hero. So
superheroes, of course you do. Every kid on the planet wants to be a superhero.
That's fine. And then you grow up. And then, but again, it's all about team leadership and getting and embracing people to work with you. It's not about working for you. So I think the whole concept of leadership has changed because the needs have changed also. And because we've been faced with so many challenges, I'm sure that people going back to history would say the same thing. At every time they were like amazing challenges. But I think also as we're opening up, and I think we have become a global world, even though globalization is being attacked in many ways. But I think the can has opened. We are a global world, and there are issues that we have to deal with coming from left, right, up, down, everything. And then you take together the whole technological changes, and we are in for a very rough ride. So we need leaders, and we don't have them, and that's another story.
The problems are global: climate, pandemic, the consequences of the war in Ukraine. But we're tending not to get people that are looking at the global aspect of issues, and that's part of the reason why we do this prize together. Is that we think you need, even if you're operating in a specific space, you need to think about it in the global context, or you will fail.
It's the old, think global, act local, being focused on from a different perspective. You have to think global. You have to also act globally, but it all starts from acting locally and then building up from bottom.
You've mentioned the pace at which everything seems to be changing, and we really do seem to live in a world where time has accelerated. Where yesterday is no longer the best predictor of tomorrow, where we're surprised by what happens. That almost by definition has to change how one leads an organization.
I don't think it changes the main elements of the character, the hard work. I think it puts more emphasis on the need to work with others, to collaborate, because everybody needs all the help. We all need all the help that we can get, and also to be able to fight polarization. And I think one of the real challenges of a leader today is to be able to work within an environment of extreme polarization. And you see polarization everywhere. And if I can touch on because I saw, in today's leaders talking about strengthening democracy, promoting democracy, saving democracy, and also about the environment. And I think, every time I read about the environment, I think there's no question that we have problems, and we have to take care of our own home, our own earth, which is our home. But I think I'm hoping that leaders in that field stay away from the polarization fad that exists today, because I think that you have to again embrace and engage. And I think even you start to talk today about any issue about the environment, and within 2 minutes, it's a polarized discussion. You either believe in it or you don't. I think it's much more complicated, and that's where you need the leaders to engage and to start building, almost a sense of duty. And we have duty to ourselves and to our children about protecting the earth. But we have to do it we have to also use a bit more strategy, and we have to think deep and think also about, it's not going to happen tomorrow. We're not going to save the earth tomorrow. And I think part of this polarization is the need that people feel to bring success tomorrow. And you can't. And you have to educate people. You have to start at a young age. You have to first make people understand and appreciate the earth, our home. So leaders today have to become much more team oriented and try to embrace people. And also, I think the importance of youth today is amazing. And yes, things happen very fast. I think even young people grow faster than how we used to grow, which means they want to have a say, and they do have a say. At the same time, they have a responsibility. But it's very important for any leader, no matter what you do, to engage the young people and also try to bring them into the team.
Let's talk about trust. Every measure of trust by every organization that tries to measure trust says it's disappearing. We don't trust the police. We don't trust the military. We don't trust our presidents, our prime ministers. We don't even trust our religious leaders anymore. Trust is the glue that holds institutions and societies together, which may be part of the reason why institutions and societies aren't doing so hot these days. How do you reverse that?
If I knew, I would be a superhero. I'm not sure, but I think that you can't just go for it. In other words, trust will come as a result of good leadership, of ethical leadership, of impactful leadership. So once you see all of these things taking place, that's how you build trust. And I think trust has been lost because of all of the things that I mentioned before have been lost. So eventually you lose trust. So I don't think we should, I mean, it's an amazing problem, but I don't think we should try to say, okay, how do we build trust as an end by itself? I think, again, we have to go back to some basics, including education, including hard work, including collaborations. And we have to fight this virus of polarization, which I think is huge. So eventually, by all these things and having good leaders, eventually trust will be regained, hopefully.
I was reminded last night that Nelson Mandela said that trust can only be developed by trusting people.
And to start trusting people, you have to start, again, being part of a team or showing leaders who lead by example. So again, by engaging, embracing people, and at the source of a lot of today's problems, maybe this is an end result of it, it is polarization, which I keep coming back to it, because it has taken human discussion out of the equation. And I think we have to go back to sitting at the same table, talking, liking one another, even though we may disagree. And we need good leaders for that. And eventually, again, trust, I think, will be regained.
Well, that indeed is the premise behind this prize, that there are good leaders out there working in fields as diverse as we saw from the three leaders we're going to honor today, a veterinarian, a jurist, and a journalist, all of whom are not just fighting the good fight, because they're not operating individually, they're operating as in collective context. They are leading people, and we need more of them. And let's leave it there. I want to thank you not just for supporting Tallberg and for your friendship, but for the amazing work that SNF is doing all over the world. You actually are making the world a bit better place.
Thank you. That's
an amazing
compliment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and many congratulations to all the leaders.
Now I have the opportunity to introduce to you our three winners, who, as I said, will be interviewed by key members of the Tallberg Network. As I've already mentioned, I'd like you to send any questions you have for them through the Q&A function, question answer, not quality assurance, question answer function. In random order, since the prizes are equal, Gladys Kalema-Zikusoka is going to be interviewed by Asha DeVos, who herself is a past winner of the Tällberg Prize in last year, 2021, and is an accomplished oceanographer based in Sri Lanka. Sam Muller will be interviewed by Carol Wanana, who is a leading businesswoman in Kenya and a member of the Tällberg's board, as well as of the jury this year. And Yevgenia Albats will be interviewed by Shahidul Alam, Bangladeshi photojournalist and political activist, who, thank God, can be with us today, and he'll tell you about that in a moment. And he was a member of the jury this year. So over to you, Asha.
Hello.
Hello, Asha. How are you?
I'm very good. Hi, Gladys. It's so good to see you.
Great to see you too.
And welcome to the family. Congratulations. It's a very well earned honor. And I will say that I was very excited when Alan asked if I would present you to the world today. So it is my honor today to have a quick chat with you. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to delve deep into all your values around leadership and stuff, but let's get started so people see the true essence of Gladys tonight.
Okay, thank you. I'm so excited to win this award. I've carried the award to Montreal. I'm here.
Lovely.
I was presented at a side event for the COP15 with Réseau Environnement, 60-year-old environmental organization that wanted to engage the general public in the COP. So that's
great.
Very nice, but freezing.
Well, us tropical people were spoiled, I think, by the warmth. But so just to start off with, like the most obvious question that I would have, given the award that you have won tonight, is what does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to you to be a leader?
I would say that I'm so excited to be recognized as a global leader. And I would say a leader is somebody who's willing to challenge the status quo. A leader, someone who's courageous, someone who's willing to, bring people along with you. As Alan has been saying in the previous discussion, a leader needs to have followers. So a leader has to be able to convince people to follow them, because you can't do things on your own. You have to do things with others in order to make a big change. Yeah. And that's something that I've learned along the way. You can only go so far alone, but you go much further with others.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's very clear from your work that for you, it is about taking everybody on this journey and enabling people. And obviously, one of the things for creating, to have followers, you have to have a vision, right? You have to have a leadership vision. What does it mean to you to have that kind of a vision, and how has it helped in your leadership journey?
It means a lot, because it's actually the vision that grounds you no matter what. And there is cases when things don't happen as you expect them to, but when you have the vision, that just keeps you going. And it's important to get everybody to buy into your vision. And in our case, of course, it's the team that we built over the years. We now have a team of about 30 people. We started off with 3, but then it's also the external stakeholders, like in our case, the people interested in the conservation issues we're addressing, the public health issues, because we're preventing disease between people, gorillas, and other great apes and other wildlife. The development community, increasing poverty in people living around habitats where there is wildlife. So it's basically being able to have a common vision, even with your external stakeholders, so that you all move together. But what I've found very exciting has been able to engage people outside the conservation community, because I think it's enabled us to accomplish a lot more.
That's right. And so, you can have this vision, but you work with so many stakeholders. And like you say, you're not always preaching to the converted, right? You're not always talking to other conservationists. You have chosen to go beyond, and that's where your success lies. So what are some of the challenges you've had to trying to convince people about your vision? Have you come up with any challenges that like stand out or are memorable, perhaps, that you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, there've been a number of challenges, but I think one of the biggest ones, as you said, crossing sectors. For example, when it started out, when we'd go to a public health donor, a very big one at that, they kind of said the reason why they want funding us is they don't fund animals. Yes, they fund prevention of zoonotic disease, but they don't fund animal projects. But currently now they're funding them. It took years. We started off when all the sectors were single sector. And whenever you try to tell people that we're doing work which is merging the 2 sectors or the 3 sectors, we always got rejections from donors. So the public health donors were like, you're animal people. And then the conservation donors would say, we don't fund public health. So, but we did eventually find those donors who saw that if you don't do it holistically, you won't have a long-term impact. So I think that would be one big one of the big challenges we faced at the beginning. But with over the past 20 years, everyone's beginning to realize that addressing the health of people, animals, and by animals I mean wildlife and livestock, and the environment together is very important in order to have a planet in balance. And I think the COVID pandemic has really made people understand what it's about. People came back to me and said, now we know what you've been trying to do,
It's a shame it took an entire global pandemic for them to realize the value of what you're doing. But I mean, it just goes to show that, you know, other big qualities that you have to have, you know, as a leader are things like persistence, but also being able to be innovative, right? Like you go to these different funders, they basically push back, but then you have to come up with innovative ways to convince them without actually giving them the example of global pandemic at the time when you were doing this, that, you know, the importance of what you're doing. And I think that really comes through with how you've approached your work. So through this work, what is it you'd like to see happening? Like, what are the changes you'd like to see in the spaces that you work in?
A lot of changes. I think we're very ambitious, which is great. It's good to be ambitious, but there are actually a number of things that we are touching that have been focusing on over the years, even beyond the organization that we founded. I think over the years, we've been seeing quite a lot of, you know, I'll start off with you and me, you know, like we're both women in conservation. There's very few of us there. But over the years, it's really improved, because even as we do our work, we find that the gender equality is very important for having long-term impact. Thankfully, that because we address both health and conservation together, women tend to be the community health workers and men tend to focus more on conservation and natural resource management. So we're able to have, because we address both together, 50% of our village health and conservation team community volunteers are men and half are women. We weren't aiming for that at the beginning, but it ended up becoming a positive unintended outcome, which is fantastic. Over the years, when I first started working with gorillas 26 years ago, there were no women rangers, but now 20% of the ranger force is women in Uganda, which is fantastic. Seeing women out there in the bush, you know, dealing with wild animals, I think has inspired other women to come along. I would say that regarding the One Health, we would love the whole governments to continue to work together. We influence the One Health practice in the country, and now there's national One Health platforms, which are the government agencies, but we'd like to see the One Health approach to conservation going beyond Uganda to other gorilla habitats. We started some work in Democratic Republic of Congo, but also to other habitats around Africa. We've had people in Kenya adopting a One Health approach through even groups such as Population Health Environment, which is another form of One Health, promoting community-based family planning around protected areas. So we help to influence a policy for the East African community. And now they have a PHE, Population Health Environment Strategic Plan. Would like to see this approach being embraced in other places. I've given a talk in India a few years ago at a Cambridge Conservation Science Conference, and people working with tigers were like, wow, would love this approach, because when you improve people's health, you show them that you don't only care about the trees and the wild animals, but you also care about them. So would love the approach to be adopted and expanded all over the world. Currently, we are influencing the practice of responsible tourism to great apes, because, you know, great ape tourism has had the biggest potential in lifting communities and countries out of poverty, because people are willing to pay a lot of money to see these charismatic species. And so, but we could also easily make them sick, because you can get so close. So we developed a policy brief for all the 21 countries in Africa that have great apes, of which 13 have great ape tourism at 21 sites. So that's something I would like to see. And actually just written a book, which is about to come out.
Oh, wow.
And one of my heroes, Dr. Jane Goodall, wrote the foreword. And this book is really about my conservation journey shaped by One Health. And I hope that through this book, we'll be advocating for, you know, sustainable approaches to conservation.
Wow.
And including approaches such as, you know, gorilla conservation coffee. We want to, for example, not depend so much on tourism, because I know with the marine habitat where you're working, you know, tourism is a big issue. It's also a big issue with wildlife tourism, and almost everyone relies on wildlife tourism. But when you get pandemics or other reasons why people can't travel, then the communities are stuck. Yeah. So gorilla conservation coffee has been one way that we've been able to keep people going during the pandemic by looking for global markets outside Uganda, like in US, UK, and New Zealand.
Amazing, amazing. And now I also understand why your out of office reply says you're writing a book. So I'm very excited to see that it's coming out. And I have not much time left, but I do want to ask one more question before I let you go, Gladys. And, you know, obviously your work and your journey has inspired so many people along the way. You know, I myself watch your work and I think it's incredible. And there are I'm sure there's lots of young girls, young women across the world who also feel the same way. So I want to, you know, ask you though, and we have 1 minute left, so you have to speak fast, but what is the one thing that inspires you? I'd love for the audience to know that.
The one thing that inspires me is seeing when we're making a difference. I'm so excited that all these concerted efforts, which you've contributed to, have resulted in the mountain gorilla numbers almost doubling. It's fantastic to see many more youth engaged in conservation. I'm glad that my children inspire me. They've been with me all the time since they were babies. My son wrote a book. My younger son also wrote an article about COVID and gorillas during the pandemic. It inspires me to see the difference. More women get engaged in conservation, more local people from where the wildlife is found becoming leaders in conservation, such as the African Primatological Society. And just seeing that there's a general move towards seeing conservation as a global issue. It's not just for the conservationists, but it's an issue that affects everyone, because if we can't protect our planet, we're all going to suffer and we won't survive. And I think that link is becoming more and more emphasized along the way. And thanks for all the great work you're doing, Asha. You're inspiring so many.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's mutual admiration tonight. And again, it's been an absolute honor to introduce you. Congratulations. Welcome to the family. And I can't wait to share many more stages with you in various areas that we cross paths.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad that National Geographic is excited that we're both Tallberg Award winners.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Sam.
Hello.
How
Carol,
are you?
I am good.
Excellent.
Good, thank you.
Well, let me start by congratulating you now that we have you here live, congratulating you once again on being a winner. I know I speak for the whole panel when I say we were impressed and inspired by the work you're doing. As a social justice junkie, that might be a good place to start, Sam. Maybe just kick us off by telling us a little bit of your personal story. You know, in Africa, it's all about the stories. A short version of your personal story, telling us what inspired you to dedicate your career and your life to this justice journey, establishing the Hague Institute for Innovation and Law, and also then acquiring the title of Justice Junkie.
Well, I suppose to a degree, it's a story that you only see when you look back, and not necessarily a story that you woke up. I woke up one day and I thought, this is entirely what I will do. But there are a couple of things. One is something that I also came across very much in the tribunals. In my family, there's loss and tragedy and injustice related to World War II, both on my father's side and my mother's side, and that was part of the family history, part of the things we talked about. And I suppose when I look back, that's one. Another one is probably growing up in Kenya, where we lived outside Nairobi, and a lot of my friends were actually boys from villages around us, and I remember one instance where one of my friends was telling me that he was beaten by his father quite often, and I didn't really get that until I started thinking, my God, why does that happen, and what could you do about that? So it's these things that slowly drove me to studying law, working for the UN. And what also probably had a big impact on me was my first posting as a young UN diplomat in the Middle East, where I was in the middle of what they call the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But my God, was that a place where justice was in your face all the time. And lastly, a few years ago, I did a little look back, and I said, okay, I am now 50. I am a privileged white man from the Netherlands. How long in my grown-up life have I needed the justice system for things that didn't go well? And I counted 5 times. And then I asked myself, how often was I happy with what it actually produced for me? And the count was actually 0. It didn't really do much for me. So it's also very personal. If it didn't do much for me, then my God, what about all the other people, so many people who are less privileged than I am, who need the system? So I suppose that's how it slowly grew.
Interesting, excellent. You know, one of the things that I found curious about your work is the concept that you wanted to start the innovation of law. I think when we think about innovation, we often don't think about the law. It just don't seem like the place where innovation sits and works. So, you know, why innovation, and what are the kinds of innovations that you've done at Hill that you have found to be quite impactful in this work you're doing, justice around the world?
Well, let me start with a little story on innovation. My son 2 years ago did his bachelor's degree in law, and he then decided he didn't want to go on to become a full-fledged lawyer. But I was kind of following him as he was studying that. And to my great shock, he was learning more or less the same stuff that I was learning 30 years ago. Maybe a few new laws, maybe a few new decisions, but the core of it was the same. And that just says it all. My wife is a doctor, and she has a niece who's studying medicine. I think my wife understands about 30% of what that niece is being taught right now. So there really is something wrong with newness in the legal sector. We started out with simple data, and there were 2 team members I would particularly like to mention here. You know, Maurits Baandrecht and Martin Gramatikov came with the idea: what if we started measuring justice needs? And my dad was a public health professor, so we were always talking about measuring, and he was always trashing conclusions that I drew from newspaper articles because they didn't, you know, weren't data, the data wasn't right. So I really understood that, and so we started measuring, and then when you measure, you start seeing, my God, there is a big problem, and that drives you very quickly to innovation. We started by just doing innovation calls to figure out, you know, is there innovation in the justice sector? And we found out there is actually much more than we ever thought. Examples are, you know, websites where people could find legal information, websites through which people can settle their disputes. We even helped set up such a website for divorce procedures in the Netherlands, which is now a standalone business. We helped develop the Wildlife Justice Commission, which is a new way of dealing with wildlife crime. There are amazing people out there that through chatbots, artificial intelligence, I don't know what, have been able to really get justice closer to people. The problem, though, and that was a discovery in our journey to justice as well, is that a lot of those innovations don't really scale. Because the sector is so closed, and also because the sector has very strict rules as to who can provide legal services or not. And I'm now probably going to offend a few lawyers, but you know, almost every country has a Legal Services Act, and in many ways, our justice systems say that only courts and law firms can provide justice in many ways. And if you're not one of those, it's really hard to break into the system. So that's when we started working with justice leaders, both from law firms and from courts and ministries to try and open that space so that these new ideas could ripen and could scale and could get financing. So we're not there yet, but I think it's starting to happen, and there's some really cool examples out there.
Fantastic. Great to hear that. I mean, obviously tackling a big area such as justice, or any of the world's big problems, I call them mother problems because most big issues need mothers to solve them, frankly. You know, as Andreas and Alan said early on, they're not going to be solved by heroic leaders or one leader. So leadership is about achieving or accomplishing things with others and through others. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about the team that works with you and how you create the right environment for them to be innovative and continue to be committed and inspired to do this work in the world. Yeah.
Wow, that's an important question. Well, maybe Carol, I can start by quoting the current Chief Justice of Kenya, the amazing Martha Koome, who
I'm a fan.
Well, she's incredible.
Big role model.
She coined a phrase in her recent vision on justice called shared leadership. And I really, and I've seen her and her team practice that. And I think that is absolutely a critical element. So when I think about this, both within Hill and outside, within Hill, you know, we cannot do our work if we don't have many disciplines. We don't have only lawyers working at Hill. We have lawyers, economists, designers, people who know about communication, social scientists, data experts. And it's only the 1 and 1 is 3 that helps us make the change. I always say no collaboration, no solutions. No trust and open learning, no solutions. Both are critical. And we you know, inside Hill, that is a constant thing that I as a leader and we as a management team need to make sure we do well, that we respect all the different expertise, and that we avoid that people come to us particular problem with only their own solution, which they have in their backpack, but they look at it openly and they contribute and ask and question and invite others to bring their expertise to the table, so that you collectively solve the problem. Outside Hill, it's much the same. You know, you need to get the police to talk to the prison, to talk to the judiciary, to talk to the planning ministry, to talk to the finance ministry, to talk to the law bar association, and I could go on. It's a bit like what Gladys said. You know, she calls it one health. It's one justice, one system to make it work. And a lot of our effort is to try and bring those things together, bring those together that could define the outcomes that you need, bring those together that could produce particular parts of the outcome that you need, from financing to expertise to the ability to scale, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that really, I think, is the core of our work. So it's not heroic leadership where one person, and maybe Gladys, to use the gorilla, you know, one big gorilla could sit on a rock and thump his or her chest and say, I did it. No, it has to happen through everybody. And it is a bit what Alan said, the long march. You fail, you try, you fail, you try, you learn, you keep going. Yeah, but the two things, collaboration and trust, I think are absolutely critical.
Yeah, I'm also reminded of what you said in the video about ownership, and you know, making sure that it's the people who are doing the work feel the ownership. It reminds me of the quote by Sue about a leader is best when people barely know he exists or she exists. His work is done, the aims are fulfilled, and they say we did it ourselves. Yeah, fantastic. All right, we are running out of time, so I wanted to ask one more question. Having been a leader myself and worked with leaders at the top of organization, I coined this phrase, personal sustainability. We talk about sustainability in all other contexts, but we watch a lot of leaders being lonely at the top, you know, struggling to sustain themselves and therefore sustain their organizations. So I'd be curious to hear what, how do you build and strengthen your resilience? How do you renew and recharge, knowing that this work still has to go forward? And then, just to add one more context to the question, so you can answer it in one go. And as you think about the future and what you want to leave behind, what's your thoughts about making sure that your work continues long after you're gone?
Wow, yeah. Well, I've got to start with an admission. I'm really bad at taking care of myself, I think, and one of the biggest challenges I think we face as an organization, and we always have, I never need to tell people at Hill to work harder. I always need to tell them to slow down, and I think I'm on the whole a mediocre example of doing that. But we try at least to be, to have the language and to allow space for vulnerability. For somebody to say, I just can't do it anymore, I need a few weeks rest or whatever, and to make that okay. For me personally, I suppose my family is really important. Going back to that space, I practice Zen meditation for the last almost 25, 30 years. So that really gives me, every week a place to go and to think. And I do nature retreats to at least once a year to keep going. But it's hard because one of the things that you have with the people that work with passion on an issue is that they just keep going. And I always feel terrible when I see too late that somebody has gone on a little bit too long. So it's a constant battle. In terms of passing on and moving on, I mean, I have a number of things that I want to do. I'm terribly jealous of Gladys and her book, because that's one of my things. I've got a 1/3 finished book that needs to finish. So that's one of the goals I've set myself, a book and an idea for a documentary. But the core word for me at Hill now is more and more the word stewardship. We've built something with all the people that have worked at Hill over the last almost 17 years, and how can we pass it on like a baby, like something very valuable. It doesn't have ownership, so I've been working a lot on this idea of stewardship, building a team that feels the ownership, and finding ways to, in that way, ensure sustainability of Hill, indeed, even without me or some of the other leaders that we have now. Yeah. Excellent. Sam, thank you so much. I'm particularly happy about the work you're doing in my country, Kenya. So keep going. We need you. And we're very grateful for the work you do around the world. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Carol.
Hello?
Hi, Yevgenia. I can call you that.
Hi. I'm fine, thank
Hi.
you. Hi.
I've really been looking forward to this because we tread such similar paths to the extent of, well, there's slight differences. I think you were able to get enough of a warning to stay out of jail. I wasn't. So I need to learn that trick from you. But really remarkable, the journey that you've had, and I'm going to dive straight in because I'm hugely curious about many of the things that have intrigued me ever since I found out what you were doing and that we were going to talk together. So let me start. We both love our homeland. I mean, that is the reason for our descent. There is the risk of being a dissident at home, which is why we've resisted the relative safety of life in exile. You, however, have finally felt the need to leave, and you've explained why it was. From a journalistic position, however, what does being in exile mean to you? Has your reporting changed? How do you reconcile with the fact that many of your viewers do not have that option to leave?
Thank you very much for your questions. And before I start answering your question, I would like to thank Tallberg Foundation and everybody involved for giving me this lovely prize. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to have it. Listen, I don't believe in long distance journalism. I do believe that in order to report about the political situation in any country, you have to be on the ground, because you have to talk to people, you have to sort of to touch the surface and etc. Unfortunately, as of now, there is no going back for me back to Moscow. To be honest with you, I'm trying very hard to get accreditation in Ukraine, because since, time and again, I write and I talk about this war, this awful war, and what happened, and why it happened, and what's going to happen, and how, Russians, Ukrainians are going to live, and, how can we help Ukraine to overcome this disastrous war, and all, and, and of course, this pronounced sense of guilt I live with, because of that my country is an aggressor. My country is killing civilians and children as we speak. As we speak, Russian Federation is destroying electricity and the entire infrastructure in Ukraine, Putin is turning Ukraine into a land that he cannot have, but he's going to make it impossible for people to live on. So, but I read about that, I talk about that at my YouTube shows, and I write about that. But in order really to do my job, I have to go there. And I applied for accreditation in, to this Minister of Defense of Ukraine. Unfortunately, they are not that eager to give a pass to Russian journalists. And that makes me even sicker, because, it is like you feel yourself being an outcast. And yes, I do accept that as many of my fellow, not just citizens, but my, people who were in the Russian opposition all these years, who, I always was opposed to Putin and to his regime. In any case, we're guilty because, we allowed them to start this war, because we failed to kick them out, because, we probably were not as effective as we could be, not as persistent as we could be. We allowed our leaders to get in jail. Anyway, so it is a very, very painful time in my life, I would say. So I never expected myself to be in exile.
But that's where you are. But it was in 1994 that you wrote The State Within a State. It was about the inner workings of the KGB. So you know something about the KGB. It also gives you an insight on Putin, who worked as KGB foreign intelligence officer for 16 years. And have commented on the ascendancy of what you call the security apparatus. In the US, where former President George Bush Sr. had been the director of CIA. There are obvious differences between the two systems. Are there similarities too?
I'm going to teach next semester here in NYU, where I am now. I'm going to teach a course on it's called The Rise of the Secret Police State. And among assigned readings, there are readings on the US system and the Russian system. There are some there are similarities between any given secret services, because each and every one of them violate human rights. Each and every one of them work on behalf of the state, and much less on behalf of people like you and me. So I think it's just natural for anyone in our line of work to be in a position to these type of services, though even though we probably agree to a certain extent that it's in modern state, it's very difficult to avoid using these kind of services. However, having said that, I think, journalists time and again we proved that sometimes we can do much better job than secret services, and we can find what, without violating human rights, without violating people's lives, we can find the information that is needed. So, and people, guys from Bellingcat who have been doing investigations on on MH17 or on the beginning of the war in Ukraine, or on corruption of Russian leaders, etc. They proved time and again that they were capable to find the kind of information that secret services couldn't. They found people who tried to kill Navalny. They proved that Navalny, the attempt on his life twice was made by the FSB people. Probably they were signed by Putin. We know that it was just that Putin had to okay this operation. Anyway, so but there is a huge differences, and the biggest difference is that in the Russian environment, the entire corporation of these graduates of the KGB, they're in power now. They are the power. There are no oversee whatsoever, no control from the side of legislature or civil society, as none of those exist. In the United States, it's a community of some 17 organizations. That's what counts, because we're perfectly aware that any secret service can be controlled only by another secret service. So we need them to compete with each other and to come to the respective appropriation committee in the US Congress and ask for money. That's what makes them more or less accountable to people they're supposed to serve.
Yeah, it's ironic that pretty much every nation espouses democracy and freedom in its rhetoric and actively suppresses in its practice. But there we are, and they seem to find us common enemies. But I'll move to something else. You've said you hate being told what to do. That's precisely what propaganda attempts. We all sympathize with the Ukrainians and the Russians who've been killed. But those of us who do not live in North America or Europe have been appalled by the hypocrisy of the West that surfaced during the crisis. Does being immersed in the West, in Western propaganda, risk you becoming blind to this hypocrisy?
Listen, you and I, we live long enough not to be afraid that we can be blind by propaganda. Probably you and I, we're pretty capable to feel, when people lie to us or when there is a propaganda instead of truth. No, I'm not afraid. Listen. In the United States, you have so many different outlets and different ways of getting information and talking to people, etc. So by using this simple tool of comparison of overlapping information, you can find out what the reality is all about.
Well, Russia obviously miscalculated. Ukraine was no pushover. The losses to the Russian army is immense. Ordinary Russians are being conscripted into a war they never signed up for. Did US, NATO, EU also miscalculate? With fuel prices going up in Europe and Russia trading despite sanctions, who stands to gain here?
I'm not sure I got your question. What do you mean NATO and Europe miscalculated?
Well, I think in terms of US and NATO, assuming that the sanctions would be far more effective than they were, I mean, despite the fact that the war hasn't gone anywhere near what Russia expected, there was the general feeling that with sanctions, Russia was going to cave in, but it's found ways to survive. And other countries have started trade. I mean, Russia's been resilient despite all the setbacks. How does that work?
Well, I think it's pretty much clear how, oil and gas prices, energy prices were very high during 2022. So Putin was able to get a lot of profits and to cover his war effort out of the energy bills. He was selling to Europe oil and gas, and with one hand, Europe was supplying weapons to Ukraine to resist Russia, and with the same hand, Europe and other countries, they were buying Russian oil and gas and creating windfall profits for Putin that he was using to build up his war effort. So obviously, but it was clear for people, whoever was in any way invested in the process, it was clear back in the spring of 2022 that financial sanctions had to be followed by export sanctions, that there was no way to impose financial sanctions unless you limit Putin's ability to pump money out of the surface through oil and gas. Unfortunately, it never happened. And one of the reasons why it never happened was that the United States and other European countries were dead afraid about rising gas prices. They were concerned that oil, prices for gas would go all the way up to $200 per barrel. And these will impair the primaries in the United States and certain elections in Europe as well. So, I mean, we know why. We do understand why. Now, is it to say that sanctions are not working entirely? No, it's wrong. They do work. In fact, in some areas, sanctions happen to be very effective. For instance, you can see that Russians are lacking some modern weaponry like missiles. Russians has to buy drones from Iran and artillery from North Korea. And trust me, these are not the most developed and modern weapons in the world. However, one of the reasons that Russians are unable to resume the production of Kalibr missiles or Iskander missiles is that there are sanctions and certain parts were produced in the West or certain machinery is needed in order to produce the parts inside Russia. So no, unfortunately, sanctions, Russia is a very big country, you're absolutely right, and has a hell of a lot of mineral reserves and natural resources. And in this way, nature is the evil which, helps Russia to double this evil in Ukraine.
Well, I think we're running out of time, so I've got to make it short, but I had to ask you something quite personal, actually, from my perspective. In Bangladesh, family members of those who've gone into exile are being targeted. Is this a fear you have? Do you have hopes of going back?
Of course I will be back. It goes without question that I will be back. I'm very, very experienced reporter. And I do know that your families and especially your children are becoming your leverage. So I undertook certain precautions ahead of time not to allow them to use their dirty tricks against my close ones. Let me put it this way, and I really don't want to proceed in that direction. Trust me, I have plenty of ears, and probably a couple of my friendly guys from the KGB, they sit on my computer and listening to our conversation as we speak.
Well, I need to learn some tips from that. I think we've run out of time. But thank you so much. I hope one of these days it'll be a face-to-face as opposed to on Zoom. But congratulations again on winning the award. And thank you, Tallberg, for allowing this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that conversation, for those conversations. One of the things that I particularly enjoy about the process we've built over the last several years is exactly sitting back, either virtually or better, as Shahadu just suggested, in person, and listening to the kinds of conversations we just heard, and sitting there and saying the way most people think about leadership is, oh, they've got to be politicians, or oh, they've got to be elected to this or that. And the basic premise, as both Andreas and I said earlier, is that there are people operating as great leaders all over the place, not just leading in the sense of trying to take an organization from A to B, but leading in terms of trying to change the political reality, to change policy, to make it a better world. And one of the things that is that I enjoy the most about all of this is sitting back, as I started to say, and watching a conversation among a Russian journalist, a Dutch jurist, and an Ugandan veterinarian, and saying, because at first blush, you have absolutely nothing in common. At first blush, couldn't be more different. And then if you sit back, and it's a bit like making tea, just let it steep for a while, you begin to hear some of the same words, some of the same thoughts, some of the same concepts. And that's happened every year since we've started this process, that great leadership does cut across borders and boundaries, that it's not about what you do or where you are, but it's rather it's about leading. The panel that was supposed to happen now was to have some jury reflections on the process. Unfortunately, the secretary of our jury, Tom Cummings, who has done the jury, he's a bit of the Sherpa of this world. He's the guy who gets a very diverse, in the best sense of that word, jury to work together over the course of a very intense week, start with a huge pile of incredibly accomplished people, and then end up with three in this case. Tom, unfortunately, had some personal issues and had to disappear at the last moment. So instead of talking about the jurors, what I'd like to do is jump to a conversation among Yevgenia, Sam, and Gladys. I've had the opportunity to sit back and listen to you talk and think about what you have in common, but I'm very curious, as you've at least virtually met each other, as today's conversation proceeded, as you undoubtedly, because that's the great virtue of the internet, looked at who each of you were. If we were together in a room, and it's still morning, so we're having coffee, not alcohol, and had a chance to sit and talk to each other, what resonates about the work the other is doing? Gladys, as you listen to Yevgenia and Sam, as you read about them, what struck you as either something that you share or something that you're curious about? You're on mute.
Right. I've been really, really inspired by getting to know Sam and Yevgenia, and hearing your stories. And I would say that one of the things that resonates between the three of us is the willingness to challenge the norm, the status quo, and make things better. And it does require being brave. I know with Yevgenia, it's even worse. Her life she's had to run away from her country. But that is something I think that resonates. We're willing to break those barriers and make the world a better place. There has to be an element of taking risks and being brave in order to make a difference, because a lot of people want to do it, but they're just scared. But reaching out of yourself and saying, let me see what I can do about it, I think is what the three of us have been able to do.
Sam?
Yeah, it's it's very, very, very hard. And I'm also, so I still have problems sometimes even thinking of myself as a leader. But let me try two things. With Gladys, what I really recognize is that working across silos and trying to, bring things together that aren't together and that should be together, and that really resonated with me. And with you, Yevgenia, you know, it's one of the foundations of law to have rights as a human with dignity, and to be able to invoke them, and how incredibly important that is, and how incredibly hard it is to organize, and how stupid it is if we allow that to slip. And I think you're dealing with an extreme situation, and I know those situations from my work at the international tribunals, where you've allowed this to totally slip. And when you're there, it's extremely hard and painful to come back to a place where human dignity with certain basic rights that you can invoke is there again. And all I can say is that what we try to contribute in our humble way, but it's tough, very, very tough.
Yevgenia, first reactions to what you've heard from Sam and Gladys today?
You know, Sam, many of us, you know, all my friends are either in jails. All my friends are either in jails or in exile. But you know what we discuss between us, in fact, you know, is we often use the word Hague. We do want to see Putin to be in your tribunal. I don't want him to be dead, you know, I don't want him to just topple. No. What I really looking for, I'm looking for this International Court of Justice. The way you did it with respect to the wartime criminals who conducted cleansing operations in the former Yugoslavia. I really want to see these, and that's if you ask me, Zhenya, what is your image of justice? I would say International Court in Hague. And I would love to report from this court. And I would love to sit with you and talk with you and ask you, how did it happen in the 21st century, after Nuremberg, after everything Europe went through and the world went through, how did we end up with the destruction of Ukraine as we speak? So I really, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing you and interviewing you in Hague. And as to Gladys, you know, I was listening to this piece on you, and I was thinking, God, you know, it's so important that people understand that there is always problems why it's difficult to resolve the issue. But, you know, it's important to understand that, you know, world and, you know, people around us, they're looking for solutions. They're looking for us to say, yeah, of course, you know, there is a way to get out of this, whatever. Of course, you know, there is a problem. You know, we understand that there is always a way, or almost, there is a way to find a solution. As you said, you know, probably all of us, we believe in what we call tikkun olam, to make a world a better place. Absolutely, 100%. If anything that, you know, really drives, at least me, I don't want to talk for others, but for sure what drives me is this notion that I still can do something to make this world a little bit a better place.
As you three were talking, I wrote down two words. One was global and one was optimism. And it strikes me that, and this tells me that our jury did their work, that all three of you live in a world where you need, want, and are working for global solutions to global problems, even if you have to work at them in very precise local levels. But that globalness, if that's a word, is so critical at a time when, as Yevgenia, you just said, you want to see the tribunal. You see, this is a global solution to this problem someday, somehow, somewhere. And the other one was optimism. You all work in spaces that I suspect there are some days that it's very hard to be optimistic. But the fact that you come to work every day is essentially a statement of optimism. That however the problems you're looking at get solved, you have to keep working, and that is optimistic. How do you do that? How do you get up every day and start again? Sam?
Well, maybe I'd replace the word optimism with hope. With
point.
A real choice. I don't know, despite myself, but I never want to lose hope, ever. And even in the darkest places, which I've seen, and I suppose that's partly a choice. What helps me with hope is my children, and the thought that they would have children, and that it just has to be, we need to deal with some of these issues for them. It's very close. It's around the corner. It's around you. And maybe it's stronger than ourselves. I mean, I just can't imagine waking up one day and I mean, there are moments when I have less hope, but in the end, I always find hope somewhere lying around, and I pick it up and I keep going.
Gladys, do you think of yourself as an optimist?
Yes, I am an optimist. For me, the glass is always half full. Maybe sometimes I'm too optimistic. I know that I've been blamed for that, but I think that if you're an optimist, you actually accomplish a lot more than if you're a pessimist. And it's much harder to give up when you're an optimist. You know that there's always another way, another option of doing things, and you always look for that option of doing things and achieving what we want to achieve. So I think in order to be able to change the world, you really have to be an optimist.
Yevgenia, I don't think of you as an optimist, but I think of you as fundamentally optimistic, because you think this will somehow work. You will make this work somehow. And I admire you enormously for that. Do you think?
Alan, yesterday I wrote a letter to a friend of mine in Yayashin who was sentenced to 8.5 years in jail 2 days ago for a piece of journalism he produced about the crimes committed by the Russian army in Bucha, that's outskirts of Kiev. He got for that one video piece, 8.5 years in jail. In the Soviet times, Soviet dissidents received lesser sentences that my friends receive now. We're running speedily in the direction of the Stalin's type of Gulag. Tonight, I will write a letter to my another friend, Alexei Navalny, who is sentenced to 9 years in jail in the maximum security prison. As you're well aware, I went to the Green Haven, the maximum security prison in the United States, in upstate New York. And I see that people who were involved in murdering, several human beings, they live in much better conditions than Alexei Navalny, who did nothing wrong except for the fact that he opposed, and he has been opposing Putin for the last 22 years of our life. So I can tell you that each time I write to them, or I think what I'm going to write to them, I tell myself, gosh, I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky, and I owe them this fight, because they live in inhuman conditions in Russian prisons. They know that they're sentenced for nothing, there was no court, no justice, no anything. So I think that's what really drives me now. I owe my friends who are in jails to do job I do and to keep going in the direction that we have to go in order to overcome this evil.
Let me stay with you for a second. We have a question from Alejandro Peralta in Mexico, who asks if you think the fact that you are now in the United States, at least temporarily, may help multiply Russian dissident voices in an impactful way.
Listen, there is no good to be in exile. And I don't think it helps to be in exile. I have to be back home, and all of us, we have to be back home. You cannot overcome Putin's regime sitting in the luxury of the United States. So no, I don't believe in all that. But, it's just a situation where I found myself.
I want to bring this to an end now. It's been a robust hour and a half. But before I do that, I want to congratulate each of you, not as much for winning this prize, but I'm glad you won the prize, as for the work that you're all doing. Different, but if we have Venn diagrams, there's all sorts of overlaps among what you're doing and what people from our past laureates are doing. We live in a world that desperately needs every bit of leadership that the three of you can conjure up. So thank you very much on behalf of the board of the Tallberg Foundation. Best we can do.
So much.
Finally, I want to thank all of the people who make this possible. The thousands of nominators and nominees, the pre-jurors and jurors, Martin Coates and the video team, the SNF team, and indeed SNF, and the two people without whom absolutely none of this is possible, and you've all met them, Sarah Ayerson and Cecilia Nordstrom. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So one last thing from me. Please join us on Thursday, December 15th, same time, same place, for a celebration of emerging leaders as chosen by the 2022 Tallberg jury. Now I'm torn between Porky Pig's "That's All, Folks" and Edward Murrow's "Good Night and Good Luck." Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you on Thursday. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.